Hello horror fans and welcome back to the scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos, the place where eldritch energy swallows itself from the abyss into an infinite cosmic cascade of life, death and, well, some really spooky stuff. What's going on guys? As always, I'll be your spirit guide Jack Finch as we don our ceremonial robes, light the candles upon the altar, and in his house at Relier, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming in the top 5 scariest Lovecraftian monsters.
Defeat my fancy. It is man's relation to the cosmos, to the unknown, which alone arouses in me the spark of creative imagination.
God damn, I just love H.P Lovecraft and everything that he spawned, every weird little nuance and horrific tick and twisted cosmic entity that somehow made its way from his strange, uniquely creepy brain through his pen and down to the page for all of us to enjoy. I'm going to say H.P Lovecraft is the godfather of all things horror. Well, what better way for us all to pay tribute to him than to scour the bestiary and pick out the creepiest of the creepy. Before we do that though folks, you know the drill by now. If you're a fan of this video, H.P Lovecraft, Cthulhu, or just top 5 scary videos in general, then be a dear and hit that thumbs up button as well as that subscribe bell so you can stay up to date with our latest and greatest uploads. On with the show. One thing's for sure, you won't find Cthulhu on this list because, come on guys, we're better than that. Kicking off at number 5, Luke Cthulhu. And what better way to start off this list than with the mother of all old gods herself, Luke Cthulhu, also known as Lu Cthulhu, or as a much more horrifying title, the birth womb of the great old ones. This twisted, pulsating mass of a mother was created by James Ambule, with its one and only appearance in the 1998 short story, Correlated Contents, which makes the very little that we do know about it even more terrifying. It poses the question, what does this hulking cosmic entity have in store for us? Well, Luke Cthulhu appears as a colossal conglomeration of innards spanning the size of a large planetary body. Imagine the planet Mars, but instead of a rocky desert-like surface, it's made up of skin and flesh and whatever else lies beneath. Luke Cthulhu possesses a strange slimy outer surface covered in countless thousands of pulsating pustules, which in fact are biological incubators, each containing a great old one in its larval stage. Basically, each one of its warts contains a small, sprightly little baby Cthulhu, or worse, and it's currently unknown how often these entities reach maturity. Hopefully for us, it's not a regular occurrence. Gross, right? Next up at number 4, GHROTH, which kind of sounds like the sound you make when you do a sick burp, right? GHROTH, also known as the Harbinger, is an all-powerful outer god that floats without purpose across the endless cosmic abyss like some malevolent, omniscient nuclear karaoke ball. GHROTH is the size of a moon and coloured in a rusty shade of orange, all encompassed by an enormous, terrifying red eye, which often closes to avoid the detection of any nearby hostile entities. It has appeared twice in the Cthulhu Mythos, first in the 1976 short story The Tugging by Ramsey Campbell, and later in 2004 in the Call of Cthulhu RPG game splat book The Stars Are Right. GHROTH spends eternity simply drifting throughout the cosmos, while terrifyingly singing its strange song, the music of the spheres. It serves a simple function. Whenever GHROTH nears a planet, any dormant great old one or outer god on the world will respond to its song and awaken, almost always resulting in the destruction of the planet, the annihilation of all life, or both. In one Lovecraftian instance, GHROTH was indirectly responsible for awakening the great old one known as the worm that gnaws in the night, who proceeded to consume the alien planet of Shagai from the inside out. Pretty metal, eh? Coming in at number 3, SHUB NIGGURATH. You betcha, aka the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, an outer god who is the very definition of how messed up the Lovecraftian universe can get. Just like Luke Cthulhu, she is a perverse fertility deity responsible for belching forward some of the vilest creatures in the whole of the Cthulhu Mythos. She appears as an evil cloud-like entity, an enormous mass which extrudes black tentacles, slime-dripping mouths, and more strangely than any other, short, writhing goat legs. She is the wife of the not-to-be-named one, don't ask, and the wife of Yog-Sothoth, who spawned forth the twins Nub and Yeb. Across the entire mythos, SHUB NIGGURATH is probably the most extensively worshipped by hundreds of twisted alien cultures and even druidic and barbaric cults on Earth. Her dark young are horrifying, pitch black monstrosities seemingly comprised of ropey tentacles who stand as tall as a tree on a pair of stumpy, you guessed it again, hoofed legs. Also, her milk, yes, you heard that correctly, her milk is often used in cult ceremonies, mutating those that drink it into fierce spawns bonds of her brood. Nevertheless, she's seen as one of the most horrific creatures in horror fiction, being referenced several times by both Stephen King and Terry Pratchett, even making her way referentially into the Doctor Who universe. She's a pretty big deal, put it that way. Next up at number 2, Wilbur Whately. This guy makes my number 2 spot simply because when I first read The Dunwich Horror, a short story by H.P Lovecraft written way back when in 1928, for me, he was the most terrifying character throughout the whole damn thing, even more so than his twin brother, the titular Dunwich Horror, who, if we're being honest, was just the sad, misunderstood result of a mad woman and an outer god. Have some sympathy, guys. Wilbur Whately was born in the rural town of Dunwich, Massachusetts, near the city of Arkham, where most Lovecraftian fiction takes place. The date of his birth was noted as the night before the hills rumbled and the dogs barked incessantly, which was telling because dogs continued to show an instinctual hatred for Wilbur the remainder of his life. Good job, doggos. We can always rely on you. Let's not glean over it. Wilbur Whately was a pretty ugly dude. The reason being that, well, he was made up of outer godness. As a child, he was described as a dark, goatish looking infant and displayed an unnatural physical and mental development. He could walk unassisted at 7 months and talk at 11 months. At the age of 4, he began growing facial hair. If you've seen the 1970 B movie, then you'll know what we're getting at, because that final reveal where Wilbur disintegrates into the floor, yeah, that's not nice. And finally, at number 1, NYARLATHOTEP. Because let's be real, no other entity in the Cthulhu Mythos is as innately evil as our good old friend Dr. NYARLATHOTEP. The big bad himself, the ancient evil that walks on 2 legs and has many names. The Black Wind, the Crawling Mist, the Haunter of the Dark, the God of the Bloody Tongue. You may not know it, but this guy is pretty much the culmination of every evil fictional overlord since his first appearance in Lovecraft's 1920 prose poem of the same name. He is a creature that carries many masks, but usually appears as a tall, handsome, joyous man with welcoming features. All of this is a ruse, however, as told in 1932's The Dreams in the Witch House. He has 1,000 other forms that will immediately invoke madness to whoever witnesses him. It's strange because out of most of the outer gods who are evil and all-powerful but never really demonstrate a clear purpose or agenda, NYARLATHOTEP seems to be deliberately deceptive and manipulative, operating a clear agenda to achieve his twisted goals and making him the most human-like amongst all the outer gods. His one true goal is to spread madness, which is more enjoyable than death and destruction, and it is often suggested in the Cthulhu Mythos that eventually he will destroy the entirety of the human race, while laughing like a madman. Well, let's hope not, eh? Unfortunately, folks, that's all we've got time for in today's video. Cheers for sticking around. Be sure to hit that thumbs up button if you're a fan of this video, and ding that subscribe bell to stay up to date with your daily dose of horror. As per usual, I've been your host, Jack Finch. You've been watching Top 5 Scary Videos, and until next time, you take it easy. Hello horror fans, and welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos, the place where all eldritch beings are cosmically bound to wander eternally in a top 5 list video for our entertainment, of course. What's going on, guys? As per usual, I'll be your spirit guide, Jack Finch, as we once again take to the altar, don our crimson robes and speak the names that shan't be spoken, and take a look at the top 5 scariest Lovecraftian monsters, part 2. Roll the clip.
He invokes the unspeakable.
Now, make no mistake, I could big up the brilliance of H.P Lovecraft until I was blue in the face, the undoubted grandfather of horror and strange tales of science fiction. Since that first moment he scrawled the name Cthulhu onto an empty page, he spawned one of the most twisted fictional canons that the world has ever seen. Well, you lapped up part 1, so let's keep it going and see what else is lurking at the bottom of the abyss. Before we do that though, you know the drill by now, guys. If you're a fan of this video, H.P Lovecraft, the eternal servitude to the great old ones, or just top 5 scary videos in general, then be a dear and hit that thumbs up button as well as that subscribe bell so you can stay up to date with our latest and greatest uploads. If you'd like to get in touch with myself or the creative team here at Top 5 Scary Videos, then please take a peek at the info box down below. On with the show. Kicking off at number 5 Igolanac, a name that makes me realise the bizarre complexities of the Welsh language. Igolanac, also known as the Defiler, is one of the more nastier, shall we say, of the Great Old Ones. He's renowned as the god of perversion and depravity, and that's just not the human perception of taboo, but anything that can be conceived by a sane or otherwise sapient being. This guy is so ready to burst into the human plane and cause some disgusting chaos that merely speaking his name will usher him into our world, which I guess I better stop saying his name then. The Defiler's true form is uncertain, but when he possesses a human host, he appears as a grotesquely obese man, lacking a head and neck and a gaping mouth in the palm of each hand. He seeks those that read perverse and forbidden literature, offering the summoner the otherwise dubious honour of becoming his priest, or just simply eating them. Next up at number 4, CTHYLLA. Also known as the Kraken or the Secret One, CTHYLLA is one of the twisted offspring of Cthulhu and Idya. She has the appearance of a gigantic red-bodied, black-ringed and six-eyed octopus with small wings, so I guess she kinda takes after her father. Similarly, like Cthulhu, she can alter her body's proportions at will. CTHYLLA's first major appearance was in his daughter's Darkling Womb, written by Tina Algens, where she was captured by marine researchers believing her to be a rare specimen of an undiscovered octopus species. Obviously, as you can imagine, it didn't go well. She also appears in The Hall of the Yellow King by Peter Rawlik in her humanoid form of a young girl as a possible bride for the unspeakable one, HASTUR. The thing that makes CTHYLLA so important though, and the reason why she's so heavily guarded by her cultists and followers, is that should Cthulhu somehow die, his secret daughter CTHYLLA will give birth to him once again. How's that for a pushy parent? Coming in at number 3, Dagon. Also known as Father Dagon, this guy is pretty damn huge when it comes to fishy amphibious cults. Dagon is an enormous deity that presides over the deep ones, the fish-like race indigenous to the Earth's oceans, and the ones responsible for the weird goings on in Innsmouth, the basis for most of Lovecraft's fictional work. First seen in his titular short story, Dagon, he's mentioned extensively throughout the Cthulhu Mythos, in the ranks of the Great Old Ones, alongside his consort and mate, Mother Hydra. He is worshipped by the esoteric order of Dagon, a shadowy cult based in Innsmouth that go to great lengths to maintaining the existence of their ocean-dwelling god. Make no mistake about it, Father Dagon is absolutely huge, dwarfing the size of ancient whales. While apparently immortal, his eternal lifespan may actually be attributed to his relationship with the Starspawn, a cosmic race of Cthulhu-like beings who sometimes select formidable specimens from a given species to protect, nurture, and empower, for seemingly reasons known only to them. Swinging in at number 2, GHATANOTHOA, aka the Dark God, or if you're being more precise, literally the most grotesque and ugliest creature in the entire Cthulhu mythos, and that's saying something. GHATANOTHOA is the firstborn of Cthulhu, spawned by Idya on the planet Zoth, whose origin is first laid out in The Thing in the Pit by Lynn Carter. He is a huge amorphous monstrosity whose appearance is so hideous that anyone who gazes upon it is literally petrified into a living cadaver. The victim is permanently immobilized, the body taking on the consistency of leather, yet the real kicker, their brain is preserved indefinitely and remains fully aware. Wow. What a way to go. The Dark God was brought to Earth from the planet Yuggoth, assisted by an ancient alien race, possibly the bug-like Mi-Go. On Earth they built a colossal fortress atop Mount Yadith-Go on the lost continent of Mu, and they sealed GHATANOTHOA inside the mountain, where it remains to this day, worshipped by a strange secret cult. No thank you. And finally, at our number 1 spot, HASTUR. And really, it has to be. Sorry. The Cthulhu Mythos has no place for puns, especially when we're addressing the name of HASTUR the Unspeakable, perhaps the most bleak and utterly evil entity in the entirety of Lovecraftian fiction. Him who is not to be named, the King in Yellow and the Yellow Sign. Although he is most famously associated with Lovecraft, HASTUR is only ever mentioned once in The Whisperer of Darkness. He was originally a creation of Ambrose Bierce and also appears in the 1895 horror collection The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers. HASTUR is defined as a great old one, but there is potentially much more to him. He is the spawn of Yog-Sothoth and the half-brother Father of Cthulhu. He is also possibly the magnum in hominandum, the overarching mystery of the Lovecraft mythos that culminates as the Nameless Mist. HASTUR appears in several vile forms. The Feaster from afar, a black, shriveled, flying monstrosity dripping with tentacles tipped with razor-sharp talons that pierce a victim's skull and siphon out their brain. And also the King in Yellow, which was also referenced in the mesmerizing first season of True Detective. Time is a flat circle. Check it out. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for in today's video. Cheers for sticking around all the way to the end. If you're a fan of this video, then hit that thumbs up button, as well as that subscribe bell so you can stay in a steady stream of your daily dose of horror. To continue on with your horror binge, please feel free to hit that playlist floating shortly above. As always, I've been your host, Jack Finch. You've been watching Top 5 Scary Videos, and until next time, you take it easy. Hello horror fans, and welcome back to the scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos, your one-stop little shop of eldritch horrors and the quizzically bizarre world of Howard Phillips Lovecraft. What's going on, guys? As always, I'll be your spirit guide, Jack Finch, as we once again stare into the cosmic abyss. And guys, if we keep this up, eventually it's going to start staring back as we take a look at the top 5 scariest Lovecraftian monsters, part 3. Well, look at us, eh? Part 3. We've managed to skip our way through the terrifying world of H.P. Lovecraft, racking up 3 videos worth of his most sinister and grotesque creations. And guess what? Still not a sniff of Cthulhu. Why? Because we're better than that. Cthulhu's been done to death. He's the Taylor Swift of the great old ones. Don't worry, guys, we've got you. 'Cause baby, now we got bad blood. Before we jump into that though, you know how it is by now, horror fans. If you're a fan of this video, this particular Lovecraft series, or just top 5 scary videos in general, then please be a dear and hit that thumbs up button, as well as that subscribe bell so you can stay up to date with our latest and greatest uploads. If you'd like to get in touch with myself, Lucy, or the creative team here at Top 5 Scary Videos, then be sure to take a peek at the info box down below. On with the show. Kicking off at number 5, ZOTH-OMMOG. An entity that really lives up to its namesake of being weird, amorphous, and full of tentacles. ZOTH-OMMOG, also known as the Dweller in the Depths, is a great old one whose first appearance was in 1975's Out of the Ages by Lynn Carter, who then later emerged in Brian Lumley's Titus Crow series. ZOTH-OMMOG is described as being distortedly cone-shaped and having 4 sucker-lined arms similar to that of a starfish, apexed with a tooth-filled maw and a great mane of tentacles. ZOTH-OMMOG was spawned as the third son of Cthulhu and Idya, untold eons ago in the binary star system of Zoth. His brood brothers and sisters are GHATANOTHOA, ITHAQUA, and CTHYLLA, and along with their father Cthulhu, they all shipped off to Earth. Eventually, ZOTH-OMMOG was defeated in the long war with the Elder Gods, and he was imprisoned deep beneath the seabed near his father's tomb in the dead city of R'lyeh. He waits there for eternity, whispering into the darkness, waiting to cast his will into the dreams of mankind. Much like his dad. Coming in at number 4, EIHORT. First appearing in the 1980 Ramsey Campbell novel Before the Storm, although appearing in reference notes since the late 60s, EIHORT is quite the mysterious great old one. And that's saying something because, as you know, these guys are pretty elusive. Here's something to sum this guy up. His name is derived from the German word Ei, meaning egg, and Horten, which means horde. Yeah, he's a walking, clicking sack of great old one babies. Gross. EIHORT, also known as the God of the Labyrinth, lives in an endless network of caverns and tunnels situated beneath the Severn Valley in England, which is near where I grew up. No thank you. EIHORT appears as an enormous gelatinous blob supported on hundreds of tiny bone-like legs. Its whole body is covered in a shifting, writhing mass of eyes which constantly disperse and reform at random. The real kicker though is the reason for EIHORT's existence. It lives for the sole purpose of capturing humans who stray into its realm. Once it captures a poor, hopeless, unfortunate victim, it offers them a bargain. Either they allow EIHORT to implant its young into their still living body and eventually after incubation burst into a disgusting brood of its vile babies, or be immediately and violently, gruesomely consumed. Yeah, I think I'd take the latter. Next up at number 3, ITHAQUA. Otherwise known as the Windwalker or the god of the cold white silence, ITHAQUA is the Lovecraftian equivalent of both the Wendigo and the Yeti, yet like with many of these terrifying great old ones, he's 1,000 feet tall and inspires horror on a cosmic scale. ITHAQUA is an enormous humanoid with webbed feet and glowing red eyes who frequently stalks the Arctic wilderness, preying on the unwary and the unfortunate. Many of those who live in ITHAQUA's hunting grounds leave sacrifices in a stark effort to appease the beast, but as you can guess, it's never very successful. Anyone who is unfortunate enough to be caught by ITHAQUA are dragged off to his true home, the ice-ridden planet of Borea, where he aims to swell his growing band of worshippers. It gets weirder though, because ITHAQUA will then attempt to mate with any females by inserting a psychic seed into their womb, inevitably developing into a great old one offspring. He aims that one day one of these terrifying children will help in destroying their true enemy, the Elder Gods, though historically this hasn't gone too well and ITHAQUA still waits for his true terrifying heir. Well, we said it before, but the great old ones are some pushy parents. Swinging in at number 2, Yig. And if you've got a fear of snakes, you may want to look away for this one. Yig, also known as the father of serpents, or even more conveniently, the snake god, has a pretty straightforward role in the pantheon of the great old ones, although it's in his method where the real fear lies. Yig manifests as a gigantic snake with the arms of a man, although he sometimes appears as a bizarre reptilian humanoid. Lizard people. Am I right? Yig is considered to be the god of snakes and serpents everywhere, and his fierce devotion to his children is the source of his wrath. When he emerges from his sleep, his sole purpose is to punish those who have harmed his serpentine brood. In The Curse of Yig, written in 1929 by Zelia Bishop and edited by H.P Lovecraft himself, a couple from Arkansas moved to Oklahoma in search of a better life in the late 1800s. Unfortunately for them though, the husband has a fear of snakes, and his wife deliberately destroys a nest of newborn rattlesnakes to ease his phobia. Well, yeah. Bad news, and Yig sends swarms of his children to attack the couple, killing their dog in the process. In the end, to ultimately take his vengeance, Yig forces the woman to kill her own husband with an axe before transforming her into a part human, part reptile monstrosity, cursing her to wriggle on her belly like a snake for all eternity. Yikes. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Azathoth, the big guy himself, and the fact that it's taken us 3 videos to finally reach this guy is saying something. Now you see, it's difficult because Azathoth isn't a great old one or elder god, he's an outer god, and that means that he doesn't concern himself with the likes of Cthulhu and his brood. He's an intangible horror, an entity that lurks in the darkest depths of space, writhing in an eternity of cosmic torment. Also known as the nuclear chaos, the demon sultan, and the blind idiot god, Azathoth's first appearance was in an unfinished 500-word short story written by Lovecraft in 1922, which would later be transformed into the dream quest of unknown Kadath. Azathoth exists outside reality, and there can be no definite description, as everyone envisions his ever-changing visage differently. He gave birth to the darkness, the nameless mist NYARLATHOTEP, and spat forth Yog-Sothoth. In The Insects from Shagai by Ramsey Campbell, his worshippers are many, and in a forest temple in the Goatswood, his cultists worship an idol carved in his image, a horrible, bestial, mouthless face with deep-sunk eyes and covered in glistening black hair. As far as Lovecraftian entities are concerned, they don't get much more cosmically terrifying than Azathoth, a creature so vile that even uttering his name can drive people to madness. I guess I best shut up then. Well, unfortunately folks, that's all we've got time for in today's video. Cheers for sticking around all the way to the end. If you'd like to continue on with your horror binge, please feel free to hit that playlist floating shortly above. Make sure to hit that thumbs up, ding that subscribe out, and show us some love in the comment section below. As always, I've been your host Jack Finch. You've been watching Top 5 Scary Videos, and until next time, you take it easy. Alright guys, you know what time it is. It's been quite a while since we clambered down into the shadowy pit of eldritch horror, but you know what they say about cosmic horror, right? The abyss only makes the heart grow fonder. Sorry, that was a terrible joke, but the point is I get a little broody when we're talking about writhing tentacular monstrosities, and Lovecraftian themed dad jokes are a new niche market that I'm trying to corner. Well, we've already traversed 3 parts of this particular list and you gobbled them up more convincingly than a ravenous Dagon, so let's peel back the lid and take a look at what shambling creations are lurking inside. Hello horror fans, what's going on, and once again welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. As per usual, I'll be your horror host Jack Finch, as today we curiously take a look at the top 5 scariest Lovecraftian monsters, part 4. Roll the clip.
Kiss, my dear.
For the curious amongst you, that clip was from Stuart Gordon's 1986 sci-fi cosmic horror From Beyond, based on the short story of the same name by the one, the only Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Because of course it is, this is a Lovecraftian monsters list, and as I always know, I'm a stickler for immersion. Also, it leads us to an interesting point, because as is the case with our previous 3 entries of this series, this list will not be featuring the high priest of the great old ones himself, the great dreamer, the sleeper of Relier, Cthulhu, because, come on guys, we're better than that. Kicking off at number 5, RHAN TEGOTH. And it's in the form and implication of this particular great old one where the Lovecraftian terror truly lies, because as will be the case with many entries on this list, many of the shambling horrors that lurk within the deep have a particularly apocalyptic purpose, and RHAN TEGOTH's cosmic significance pretty much spells the end of civilization as we know it. Well, that's if it wakes up anyway, so let's tread carefully. Created by Hazel Held with an accredited co-creation from Lovecraft himself, RHAN TEGOTH's first appearance came in the astounding short story The Horror in the Museum, which is exactly as it sounds, and yes, a Lovecraftian protagonist was stupid enough to find a great old one and stick it in a museum. And as we all know, that's terrible for business. Also known as the terror of the hominids, yes, as in us, and he of the ivory throne, RHAN TEGOTH is described as a 15-foot Medusa-esque insectoid amphibious god that is particularly acclimatized in the deep dark ocean. For millennia it lived in the vaporous boiling seas of Yuggoth before its machinations were devised, and it was hurtled toward Earth roughly 3 million years ago during the Pliocene epoch, where it landed in a remote part of Alaska and commenced its slumber. As The Horror in the Museum describes, it was discovered by a George Rogers in 1926, where it was briefly contained in London before being lost to a shadowy cult, briefly appearing again in the 1980s and the 1990s. The thing is with RHAN TEGOTH, although of little power compared to the rest of its brood, this guy spells the return of the old ones. When it crashed into Earth, it was the last of the cosmic horrors to fall asleep, and the high priest himself intended RHAN TEGOTH to be the first one to awake, to herald the return of the great old ones. Coming in next at number 4, the SHOGGOTHS. Because although we've covered great old ones, outer gods and shambling horrors alike, I feel that we're yet to fully take a look at some of the more monstrous races that inhabit the Cthulhu Mythos, and perhaps the most vile and interesting of those creations are the SHOGGOTHS, one of Lovecraft's most curious and divisive devices, who have played an incredibly interesting yet equally horrifying role in the mythos. The SHOGGOTHS are a race of amorphous, shape-shifting beings originally created by the Elder Things through highly advanced genetic engineering to serve them for eternity as formless tools that would do their bidding. The SHOGGOTHS are blobs of self-shaping gelatinous flesh, almost like an amoeba, and are capable of shaping themselves into whatever organ or shape they find needful. The Elder Things abused them for eons, creating their vast underwater cities and ancient kingdoms deep in the bowels of planet Earth. The thing is though, despite being thoughtless writhing masses of tentacles and maws, eventually after millennia they mutated and developed sentience, where they rebelled against their masters and consumed them, and from there they created their own giant cities, which is where we first got a taste of the horrifying SHOGGOTHS in Lovecraftian fiction in 1931's At the Mountains of Madness, where the last remnants of this vile race of fleshy beings were found buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice by the one and only William Dyer. And as it turns out, the last SHOGGOTH had sustained itself by feasting on penguins, which makes it that much more evil. Next up at number 3, ZOTH-OMMOG. And this guy comes from a long line of great old ones that are incredibly difficult to pronounce, which even for Lovecraftian fiction is probably on the more master tier side of deciphering the Eldritch tongue, but whatever. I'll give it a go. ZOTH-OMMOG, whose grandfather is GHROTH, whose father is GHROTH, whose mother is Jesus Christ, what is that? Whose mother is Stilzemgi and whose child is known as WILBUR. Okay, nailed it. Maybe, I think so. But anyway, the point is this particular Great Old One was created by Clark Ashton Smith, one of Lovecraft's contemporaries, who whilst having a penchant for language, also had a desire to create some of the vilest, weirdest cosmic horrors in the genre. ZOTH-OMMOG, also known as the Sleeper of Nakai, is a Great Old One, often appearing in the form of a monstrous, vile, toad-like creature who is often found asleep in the deep bowels of his kingdom, waiting for eternity for sacrificial offerings. He's definitely the couch dweller of the brood, but the slothfulness of ZOTH-OMMOG is exactly what makes him so horrifying. Deep beneath the earth, ZOTH-OMMOG waits within his black temple, where his will is carried out by a writhing, formless spawn of polymorphic entities made of black goo that sit inside his throne in basins carved from ancient stone. Although the Great Old One himself rarely moves, the formless spawn are alive and writhing within his kingdom, ready to consume any curious adventurer or lost soul that stumbles upon him, where they'll attach themselves with their undulating appendages, rip their flesh to shreds and feed it to their master bit by bit. Perhaps more than any other Great Old One in the mythos, ZOTH-OMMOG isn't willing to lift a finger to bring about an apocalyptic cosmic horror. He'd just rather get fat and sit on his obsidian throne and wait for it to come to him. Lazy. Swinging in at number 2, BYATIS, and I absolutely adore the lore behind this particular deity, simply for the fact that it approaches human history in an incredibly interesting and equally terrifying way. When you think of Lovecraftian fiction, you don't exactly think of the Roman Empire, do you? Well, let me introduce you to the serpent-bearded BYATIS, the Berkeley toad, a writhing multicolored entity with a single eye, the claws of a crab, and an endless beard of tentacles. His appearance is caught somewhere between a spider, somewhere between a crab, and somewhere between the horror that lies at the end of all dreams. Created by Robert Bloch, BYATIS first appeared in the September 1935 issue of Weird Tales, but would later go on to play an integral role in Ramsey Campbell's 1964 short story, The Room in the Castle. Although not exactly on the most powerful scale compared to the rest of the Great Old Ones, in ancient times BYATIS was summoned to Earth by the Deep Ones to join the rest of his brood, but yet during some unknown event, BYATIS was cut off from the rest of his ilk by the warring elder gods and sealed behind a stone door in what would later become the Severn Valley. Eons later, when the Romans conquered Britain, a small band of soldiers heard the whisperings of the Great Old One and became corrupted by his will. Driven mad with cosmic torment, the Roman soldiers formed a cult around the god, which were eventually consumed by his eldritch will in a failed attempt to escape the stone seal. Centuries later, a Norman castle was built over the site that contained BYATIS prison, and it wasn't until the 18th century when BYATIS was discovered by a warlock named Sir Gilbert Morley and eventually used as a puppet for his dark arts. For hundreds of years, BYATIS would feast upon the townsfolk offered to him by Morley to keep his primal needs satiated, but eventually BYATIS became so large that he trapped himself within his cavernous prison for eternity. Well, until he sheds a few pounds at least, and then I'm guessing he'll be really mad. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, UBBO SATHLA. And our final spot is reserved for an incredibly interesting and different kind of Lovecraftian concept, because although this specific anomalous entity is very much an outer god of the Cthulhu Mythos, one of the most powerful ancient beings in existence, it's also a creation that is far removed from anything else. Let me introduce you to UBBO SATHLA, which is perhaps the eldritch progenitor of all life as we know it. Yeah, get ready for an existential kind of crisis. UBBO SATHLA, also known as the unbegotten source or the demiurge, is a huge protoplasmic mass resting within a forgotten grotto deep beneath the frozen earth. The being itself is a life form like few others within the mythos and is comprised of a mass of writhing substances spontaneously generating primordial single-celled organisms that pour unceasingly from its shapeless form. It is thought that UBBO SATHLA was the original spawn of all forms of life on Earth, spitting forth prototype after prototype before it reached its cosmic epoch, and just as the giver of life, it can also just as easily take it away, as whatever its endless mass of pseudopods touch becomes forever devoid of life. Created by Clark Ashton Smith again, and first appearing in its short story of the same name, the ultimate purpose of UBBO SATHLA is relatively unclear, yet deep within its ancient hive it is said to guard a set of stone tablets believed to contain a hidden knowledge of the elder gods. However, some cultists also profess that UBBO SATHLA's destiny is to someday reabsorb all living things on Earth back from whence whence they came, consuming it back into its endless, formless shape of UBBO SATHLA. It is also said that in ancient times the demiurge split off a portion of itself and became the vile protean mass known as HOTH, the source of uncleanliness that now resides deep beneath the horrifying landscape of Mount Vormithadreth, spitting forth endless horrors of miscreation and abomination. Yeah, if you can't tell, UBBO SATHLA is pretty damn terrifying, and this eldritch horror has its fingers in many pies. I mean, if it had fingers. Well, there we have it, horror fans, our part 4 list for the top 5 scariest Lovecraftian monsters. Now, I know you all have quite the appetite for the great old ones and elder gods alike, so why don't you let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below, as well as any choice picks of your own, and who knows, maybe somehow we can peer back into the abyss and find enough horrifying components for part 5. Before we depart from today's video though, let's first take a quick look at some of your more creative comments over the past few days. Patrick Darling says, my bucket list includes going to outer space, reaching the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and getting a shout out from Jack at top 5 scary videos. Well, Patrick, my good man, that is one hell of a bucket list, and look, you've already got one ticked off. Here is your resounding bucket list shout out. Now, you better get building a submarine or a rocket. I guess they're pretty similar. Maybe you can reuse some of the parts. Recycling. Well, on that oddly specific note, unfortunately that's all we've got time for in today's video. Just stick around all the way until the end. If you were a fan of this video, or just top 5 scary videos in particular, then please be a dear and hit that thumbs up button, as well as that subscribe bell, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. As per usual, I've been your horror host Jack Finch. You've been watching top 5 scary videos, and until next time, you take it easy. Guys, you know what time it is, because as it seems your insatiable hunger for the horrifying eldritch creations of the Cthulhu Mythos is more ravenous than the gluttonous maw of SHUB NIGGURATH herself, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young. Truth be told, if we could, we'd continue this list for as long as Azathoth himself remained in eternal slumber, because there's nothing more enriching and entertaining than arduously attempting to pronounce the names of some of the most bizarre creations in Lovecraftian fiction, whilst having some horror-fueled fun in the process. And believe it or not, if you've been a fan of this series since its inception, there's much more where that came from. Hello horror fans, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the Scary channel on YouTube, top 5 scary videos. As per usual, I'll be your horror host Jack Finch, as today we curiously take a look at the top 5 scariest Lovecraftian monsters, part 5. For the curious amongst you, that scene was from John Carpenter's 1995 classic In the Mouth of Madness, and whilst it's not Lovecraftian per se, it served to inspire one of the most accurate depictions of cosmic anomalous creation in the whole of horror cinema. After all, do you read Sutter Kane? Nonetheless, it serves to set the foreboding scene for this top 5 scary Lovecraftian list, and if you're in the mood for some cosmic horror, there's so much to be enjoyed in the Mouth of Madness. Oh, and as always, there'll be no Cthulhu on this list in particular, because if we can do 4 parts without him, then 5 should be a breeze. Anyway, on that note, on with the show. Kicking off at number 5, SHAURASH-HO. And whilst we've previously plunged into some of the more horrifying monstrous races in Lovecraftian fiction, we have to also give note to the terrifying ghouls, and their even more ravenous and grotesque progenitor, SHAURASH-HO, the father of all ghouls, also known as the prowler amongst the tombs. In the expanded universe of the Cthulhu Mythos, little is described about the nature of the elder gods, who are thought to have served as the deities of many earthly religions, but are in fact eldritch abominations themselves. Now, there's a lot of incestuous crossover when it comes to the lineage of cosmic horrors, but it is thought that SHAURASH-HO is a direct descendant of Cthulhu himself, who then went on to mate with another descendant of Cthulhu, the elder god Bast, in order to create the cultish race of ghouls who now lurk in the shadows of Earth and the tumultuous dreamlands, worshipping whichever cosmic horror that they can get their hands on. Yeah. It's pretty messed up. Although his appearance has never been outwardly described, Lovecraft himself penned mention of SHAURASH-HO in many of his correspondences, and tied the relentless progenitor to many other vile creations of the mythos, such as Kabar the serpent and GHROTH the burrower, who was alluded to have been created after SHAURASH-HO seduced and mated with a Roman noblewoman, Vibernia, an actual historical figure who just so happened to be the legendary ancestor of Lovecraft himself. Again, yeah, it's pretty damn messed up. I mean, I'm not entirely sure whether I want to know more about SHAURASH-HO or whether I'm thankful that he never made it out of the confines of Lovecraft's letters. Either way, SHAURASH-HO, in fictional terms or otherwise, just so happens to be the actual distant ancestor of Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Yeah. Coming in at number 4, the flying polyps, which is a fun phrase to say, isn't it? And no, these guys aren't a miraculous group of trapeze artists and tightrope walkers traveling the world in a pop-up circus, but instead one of the most inherently vile races of aliens in the wider Lovecraftian universe. As described in The Shadow Out of Time in their first and only appearance, they were a horrible elder race of half polypus, utterly alien entities which had come through space from immeasurably distant universes to dominate Earth alongside 3 other solar planets about 600 million years ago. They first colonized Earth before the arrival of the great race of Yith, the only cosmic entities to keep record of the terrifying alien mysteries, who were notably evasive on describing them, making fearful references but shying away from any actual description. We know that they are capable of flight despite having no wings or appendages to do so, and seem to demonstrate an innate propensity to control air currents for offensive manipulation purposes. Although airborne, they also seem to leave behind a strange 5-toed radial footprint wherever they went, a disturbing footnote that features in The Shadow Out of Time. The flying polyps first built immense and vast cities out of basalt in their new territory of Earth, where they dominated the planet as an aggressive and predatory species before coming into contact with the technologically superior Yithians millions of years later. After a bloody and violent war, the great race of Yith prevailed, although they only managed to force the polyps back to their subterranean catacombs that lay deep beneath their basalt cities, sealing off the tunnels in an eternal tomb, where they now presumably wait to be released. Yeah, that's often the case with Lovecraftian fiction, isn't it? Don't look down. Next up at number 3, Kalut. And if you have a particular fear for giant earwigs and centipedes, then you're probably going to want to look away for this fleshy Lovecraftian entity. Also known as the Ravenous One, Kalut is a gigantic insectoid larva-like horror that dwells deep within the nebulous realm of Kgilmnon, a galaxy of pure cosmic nightmare that was first introduced in the 1998 publication His Hour Upon the Stage by J.B. Lee. Although written outside the timeline of most of the Lovecraftian expanded universe, Kalut seems to exist in stark opposition to the outer gods of Azathoth and his brood, and also seems to suggest that the life forms progenited by the nuclear chaos weren't the only creations in the infinite mystery of the universe, which is a terrifying notion in itself, isn't it? After all, if Kalut wasn't created by Azathoth, the origin of all cosmic horror, where did it come from? Kalut is an alien entity of unimaginable power, with its most prominent abilities being mind manipulation, telepathy, omniscience, immortality, and perhaps even the potency to warp reality itself. In the pantheon of the Yog-Sothothery, it is suggested that Kalut may even rival NYARLATHOTEP in power, and it is thought that the Ravenous One is as old as reality itself, giving light to the fact that Kalut may be a Lovecraftian entity like no other, opening up the pathway to an infinite realm of terrifying possibilities. In his nightmare galaxy, Kalut is worshipped by an insectoid race known as the Gowroids, alien parasites that seem to possess a diminished supernatural portion of their god's power. It is thought that Kalut created the insectoid servant race from his own flesh purely to serve him, as the Gowroids are one of the only cultist races in the Cthulhu Mythos that thrive alongside the god that they worship. Swinging in at number 2, Dowloth. And this one is a pretty difficult horror concept to accurately portray, and like many of these Lovecraftian entities, as well as the wider anomalies of the Cthulhu Mythos that have expanded upon them, the true fear of Dowloth lies in the implication of its design. Also known as the Render of Veils or the Parter of Veils, Dowloth is a member of the Outer Gods, a collection of perhaps the most powerful cosmic horrors in the universe, brothers and sisters of the all-knowing and all-slumbering Azathoth, the blind idiot god. And much like Azathoth, as well as the nameless mist, Dowloth dwells within a dimension beyond that of our comprehension. Dowloth's worship is incredibly rare on Earth, as even the most fanatical of cultists have never even heard whispers of his name, but instead the Outer God is worshipped by a small sect of astrologer priests in the forgotten corners of the cosmos, and their zealotry and devotion to him reward an unimaginable power. Those that successfully worship Dowloth are said to be able to see the past, the future, and even the minute gateways where objects extend and travel between different dimensions. Where that power comes from is anyone's guess entirely, because the actual eldritch function of Dowloth is of immeasurable complexity. Dowloth can only be summoned in pitch black darkness by his cultists, as his vast and indescribable shape causes even the most devout worshippers to go mad at the sight of him. If that's not existentially terrifying enough, if he's not held within the confines of some kind of magical containment, the Render of Veils will continue to expand, perhaps even at an infinite rate, and those enveloped by the god are transported to a bizarre remote world of impossible design where they quickly die a horrible death. Created by Ramsey Campbell and appearing in his short story The Render of Veils, Dowloth is perhaps one of the most mysterious entities in Lovecraftian fiction, and that's saying something. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the High Priest Not to Be Described, which, although it sounds like a pretty unnecessary title, perhaps may be one of the most mysterious creatures in Lovecraftian fiction. And I know that I've said that quite a bit throughout this mystery-inducing video, but you'll soon find out just exactly why. In Lovecraft's 1926 novella The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, Randolph Carter finds himself thrust into the chaotic and horrifying world of the Dreamlands as he flicks between eldritch realities, stumbling upon a whole host of horrifying and bizarre creation. At one point, Carter is captured and taken to the plateau of Leng, where he is taken down through a labyrinth of tunnels deep beneath the bowels of the Dreamlands and is forced into an audience with a creature known only as the High Priest Not to Be Described. Although in direct disregard for its title, the creature is described by Lovecraft as a lumpish figure robed in yellow silk, wearing a similar silken mask that communicates only through a bizarre and unsettling ivory flute. Instantly, Randolph Carter knows that the creature he is staring at is a horror of unimaginable power, and quickly loses his mind after fleeing and throwing one of the High Priest's servants down an impossibly deep pit. Although only brief in appearance, many have speculated as to the true origin of this High Priest, with the majority suggesting that HASTUR, the King in Yellow, is the prime suspect. However, that doesn't explain the fact that this story was written before August Derleth made the connection between HASTUR and the Yellow King, and the High Priest's yellow silken robes are thought to be merely a coincidence. Others have claimed that the most likely suspect is the crawling horror himself, NYARLATHOTEP, although to counter that, it's important to note that NYARLATHOTEP appears elsewhere in this novella directly described in his pharaoh form, leaving us to scratch our heads as to who the hell this horrifying High Priest actually is, and what Randolph Carter saw to inspire such unfathomable fear. It seems that in the Dreamlands there may be entities that are more unimaginable and terrifying than even the outer gods themselves. Well, there we have it, horror fans, our list for the top 5 scariest Lovecraftian monsters part 5. Look how far we've come. What do you guys think? Do you agree with our picks, or do you have your own top 5 list of your own? Let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Before we depart from today's video though, let's first take a quick look at some of your more creative comments from part 4 of this Lovecraftian series. First up, Bernard Mulligan says, "Well done on the names, Jack. I usually don't even bother when I read the stories. I just think fleshy thing or insect fish." Wow, that seems like a pretty decent tactic, Mr. Mulligan. I'll have to give that one a try when an outer god has a name longer than 20 characters, because that's just, you know, that's just impossible. Next up, John Marble says, "Love as always. You could make a whole channel for Lovecraft and then I would basically just explode." Well, that's very much appreciated, John. Thank you, but please don't explode. On that note, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for in today's video. Just stick around all the way until the end. If you were a fan of this video or just top 5 scary videos in general, then please be a dear and hit that thumbs up button as well as that subscribe bell. And I'll be seeing you in the next one. As per usual, I've been your horror host, Jack Finch. You've been watching top 5 scary videos. And until next time, you take it easy. Now, you know that we all love some Howard Phillips Lovecraft over at Top 5 Scary Videos, but for the most part, we've only ever covered the great, fleshy, tentacle creatures that want to spread madness and ruin throughout the universe. But we've never really touched on the few brave souls that try to combat them, or, well, in most cases, brave victims. Lovecraft had a penchant of creating flawed, oftentimes throwaway characters that served as the tasting menu for the great old ones, and the only thing left for us to do is to pay tribute to them. Hello horror fans, and welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. As per usual, I'll be your horror host, Jack Finch, as we finally receive our diploma from the Miskatonic University before heading out into a horrifying new world and take a look at the top 5 scariest Lovecraftian protagonists. Roll the clip.
Wild country, eh, Mr. Wilmar? I think you'll find time runs differently here.
For the curious amongst you, that clip was from the 2012 release of The Whisper in Darkness, the H.P Lovecraft Society's cinematic interpretation of the story of the same name, which we actually recently covered in our scariest Lovecraftian movies list, and it's great, so give it a watch. Now, there are a few honourable mentions for this list, Albert Wilmarth being one of them, as well as Herbert West, Randolph Carter and Gustav Johansson, but, you know, I'm just keeping it fresh. Kicking off at number 5, Dr. Henry Armitage, the Dunwich Horror. And this guy is perhaps the most hardcore, eldritch-hating mother trucker in the entire Cthulhu mythos. Even more impressive then that this guy maintains his status as a cosmic badass at the ripe old age of 73. He's seen it all and he isn't about to fall aghast at the sight of a tentacle-spewing horror. Nah, He's not about that. Appearing in Lovecraft's 1928 short story The Dunwich Horror, Dr. Henry Armitage is the stern-faced librarian of Arkham's Miskatonic University, and although he isn't exactly the leading man of the story, which is what this list is all about, he's the one who inevitably puts Wilbur Whately and his grotesque twin brother in their place. Move over Yog-Sothoth, there's a new daddy in town. Lovecraft himself said that he identified with Henry Armitage, seeing himself as a frail old scholar who had the passion and drive to combat the maddening armies of the void. Throughout the last act of The Dunwich Horror, Dr. Armitage proves exactly what he went to school for, deciphering an ancient text to summon lightning from the cosmos and subsequently blowing the Dunwich Horror to smithereens. Yeah, if that's not enough reason to love this guy, I don't know what is. Coming in at number 4, Walter Gilman, The Dreams in the Witch House. And it's really hard not to like Walter Gilman in all of his bittersweet tragic glory. And when you boil it down, The Dreams in the Witch House, written by Lovecraft in 1932, is actually a really emotional story. A curious, bright young man just trying to find a room to rent so he can keep a roof over his head while he studies, who gets caught up in the evil goings on of a witch and her elder gods, and inevitably dies one of the most hardcore deaths in all of Lovecraftian fiction. As the short story explains, Walter Gilman is a student of mathematics and folklore at Miskatonic University, studying non-Euclidean calculus and quantum physics, which is pretty noble stuff in itself. Well, shortly after moving into his new rental at the Witch House, the famed ancestral home of Keziah Mason, an infamous Massachusetts witch, he starts having a series of bizarre dreams that quickly become alarmingly real. Then he finds an ancient eldritch artifact, and what does he do? Does he flee the house like any reasonable person? Of course not. He's a scientist and he knows he's got to get to the bottom of these strange happenings. Turns out the witch is real, she's sacrificing a child to NYARLATHOTEP and has a terrifying cat-rat familiar called Brown Jenkin. Thankfully our boy Walter saves the day, but sadly not the child, kills the witch, and then gets eaten in half by Brown Jenkin, as in it literally burrows through his body and eats his heart from inside out. Nasty. Swinging in at number 3, Dr. William Dyer at the Mountains of Madness. And this is exactly what I love about Lovecraft, because with the right setting and circumstances, even a geologist can become the biggest badass in the valley. If you haven't read At the Mountains of Madness, I'd highly recommend it, and for me it's one of Lovecraft's greatest novellas, simply because of its atmospheric world building and also because of this guy, Dr. William Dyer, the man who knows no fear. During the events of the story, William Dyer, a professor of geology at Miskatonic University, plans an expedition to Antarctica to return to the discovery of an ancient ruin that lies beyond a range of mountains bigger than the Himalayas. Of course, in typical Lovecraftian fashion, the ruins are brimming with shoggoths and vile cosmic creations, but does our boy William Dyer turn tail and run at the first sniff of maddening fear like the majority of Lovecraft's characters? Nah, he's a geologist, and his only goal is to figure out exactly what the hell these ancient alien invaders are planning. Granted, later on he actually is chased out of the ruins by a shoggoth and heads back to civilization. Is he a bumbling, rambling ruin of madness and cosmic fear? Nah, he's planning another trip. So much so that Dr. William Dyer is one of the very few characters to make a canonical return, and he's back at it again, making an appearance in The Shadow Out of Time, heading off to Australia's Great Sandy Desert in pursuit of ancient aliens once again. He is unstoppable. Next up at number 2, Titus Crow, the Titus Crow series. And I know I'm probably going to perturb a few people for putting this guy so high, but what the hell, it's my list. First appearing in the 1970s short story Billy's Oak by Brian Lumley, Titus Crow is a Lovecraftian character written by an Englishman in the mid-70s. That is not unlike any other character in the Cthulhu Mythos, but that's the beauty of Lovecraft's fictional legacy, right? Other writers who were there to pick up the torch and carry on with the eldritch battle of cosmic horror, and in my opinion, Titus Crow is one of the most badass protagonists in the entire mythos, figuring himself as a bizarre Lovecraftian blend of Van Helsing, Sherlock Holmes, and the one, the only Doctor Who. Great mix. Why? Well, as Brian Lumley himself explained, he had trouble relating to characters who fainted at the hint of a bad smell, as is often the case in HBL's work. The difference here being that his guys fought back, and Titus Crow is pretty damn good at fighting back, often locked within a never-ending battle between the great old one ITHAQUA, clutching his arsenal of ancient eldritch artifacts, including the Clock of Dreams, which really is a TARDIS, but whatever. Hey, he even becomes a cyborg after the events of the transition of Titus Crow, and fully kits himself out with a great old one hunting skin suit so he can better combat the evil forces of cosmic horror. Now that's my kind of story. And finally, our number 1 spot, Dr. Marinus Bicknell Willett, The Case of Charles Charles Dexter Ward. And wow, that was a mouthful. But I was determined to fully address the man exactly as Lovecraft intended. Seriously, he uses his full name like all the way throughout the story. I usually do that when I'm trying to pad out the word count. I like your style, Howard, I really do. Nevertheless, Dr. Willett is perhaps one of the most badass characters that has ever faced an eldritch entity, and he makes the top spot on our list for one reason and one reason alone. This humble human doctor outwits an ancient eldritch warlock at his own game. Believe me, that's no small feat. Throughout the events of the case of Charles Dexter Ward, written in 1927 but published posthumously in the May and July issues of Weird Tales in 1941, the novel describes how Charles Ward became obsessed with his distant ancestor, Joseph Curwen, an alleged wizard who was in cahoots with Yog-Sothoth and had the ability to resurrect the dead. All in all, he was a pretty nasty guy, and Charles Ward inevitably becomes brutally murdered by his long-lost great-granduncle after politely resurrecting him. Well, in the long run, he's no match for Dr. Marinus Bicknell Willett, who is so sick and tired of the whole ordeal. He's had enough of chasing necromancers through abandoned asylums that in a desperate battle of incantations, he manages to somehow outspell the unoutspellable and crumble old Joseph Curwen to dust. See you later, bud. Well, there we have it, horror fans, our list for the best of the best Lovecraftian protagonists. Why don't you let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for in today's video, but before we depart, let's read out a quick few comments from over the past few days. Michael Yoda says, would love to see something on John Wyndham's work. Many movies like The Day of the Triffids, Chucky, The Chrysalids, and The Midwich Cuckoos. And great suggestion, Michael. I'm from the same county of Warwickshire as the man himself. Cheers, buddy. I'll see what I can do. I've been recently thinking we should cover some Mervyn Peake stuff, so maybe it would slot in nicely. Great stuff. Wonder Weirdo says, Jack, do more Lovecraft content. If you don't, I'll ring your doorbell and run away. Wow, that's just straight up rude, Wonder Weirdo. And I don't negotiate with doorbell ringers. Just kidding, man. You got it. Also, we used to call that game Knock a Door Run back in the UK. What did you guys call it? There you go. Comment content. Well, on that note, I'm going to knock a door run out of here. Cheers for sticking around all the way until the end. If you're a fan of this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, as well as that subscribe bell, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. As always, you've been watching Top 5 Scary Videos. I've been your host, Jack Finch, and until next time, you take it easy.